Hi guys, today we are going to find out, what if Stalin had died in 1920? You're standing in the Kremlin's dim corridors as news spreads like wildfire through the revolutionary halls. The Georgian revolutionary who helped orchestrate the October Revolution has succumbed to typhus during the brutal civil war. Lenin's face contorts with genuine grief as he loses not just a comrade, but his most reliable administrative enforcer. You witness the immediate power vacuum as Bolshevik leaders circle like wolves, each sensing opportunity in tragedy. The irony hits you. Stalin, the man who would have ruled with an iron fist, dies from a microscopic enemy. Trotsky's military brilliance suddenly seems more valuable than ever as the civil war still rages across the vast Russian landscape. You probably won't survive the political earthquake about to reshape not just Russia, but the entire world order. Lenin clutches Stalin's final letter, unaware that history has just taken a dramatically different turn. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where this alternate history journey takes us all. Now, sit back and let's dive into today's alternate journey together. The funeral bells toll across Moscow as you witness the burial of a man who never became a dictator. You watch Leon Trotsky stride into Lenin's office with the confidence of a man who knows destiny has chosen him. His brilliant military mind, forged in the fires of revolutionary warfare, makes him the obvious successor to lead Soviet Russia. The other Bolsheviks, Bukharin, Zinoviev, Kamenev, suddenly seem like mere intellectuals compared to the architect of Red Army victory. You observe Trotsky's piercing gaze as he outlines his vision of permanent revolution to a nodding Lenin. Without Stalin's bureaucratic machinery to oppose him, Trotsky's charisma and war record create an unstoppable political momentum. The Red Army commanders rally behind their former leader, seeing him as the natural choice to guide the revolution forward. You witness Trotsky consolidating power with the same tactical brilliance he used to defeat the White Armies. His international outlook immediately shifts Soviet policy from defensive survival to aggressive expansion of communist ideals. The Politburo meetings become theaters where Trotsky's revolutionary fervor drowns out more cautious voices. You see Lenin, weakened by his strokes, increasingly deferring to Trotsky's dynamic leadership and global ambitions. By late 1921, you're watching the emergence of a very different kind of Soviet leader. Where Stalin would have built socialism in one country, Trotsky prepares to export revolution across continents. You stand on the frozen battlefields of 1922 as Trotsky's reinvigorated Red Army crushes the last white resistance with unprecedented ferocity. His doctrine of permanent revolution transforms military strategy from mere defense to aggressive ideological expansion. The Civil War ends not with exhausted compromise, but with Trotsky declaring victory as a stepping stone to global communism. You witness Red Army units, instead of demobilizing, being reorganized for international revolutionary support missions. Soviet military advisors begin appearing in Germany, Hungary, and other nations ripe for communist uprising. Trotsky's war trains roll across the vast Russian landscape, carrying revolutionary propaganda alongside military supplies. You observe the Red Army becoming less a national defense force and more an international revolutionary vanguard. The military-industrial complex that would have taken Stalin decades to build begins immediate construction under Trotsky's urgent direction. Foreign communist parties receive not just moral support, but actual weapons, funding, and tactical expertise from Moscow. You see Trotsky addressing massive rallies of soldiers, promising them glory in liberating the world's oppressed masses. The defeated white generals flee not just to exile, but to warn Western powers of an unstoppable red tide. By 1923, you're witnessing the birth of a Soviet Union designed from its foundation for global conquest. You watch the streets of Berlin erupt in 1923 as German communists, backed by Trotsky's resources, launch their revolution with deadly efficiency. Unlike our timeline's failed uprising, these revolutionaries possess Soviet weapons, tactics, and most crucially, unwavering financial support. The Weimar Republic trembles as red flags replace imperial eagles across industrial cities from Hamburg to Munich. You witness French and British diplomats frantically coordinating responses to what they recognize as Soviet-sponsored conquest. Trotsky's agents infiltrate European labor movements, transforming strikes into armed insurrections with surgical precision. The Hungarian Soviet Republic, crushed in our world, rises again with Moscow's military advisors guiding every strategic decision. You observe Italian factory workers seizing production facilities, while Soviet trade delegations provide revolutionary blueprints. Poland, barely independent, faces renewed pressure as Trotsky views it as the crucial bridge between Soviet territory and revolutionary Europe. The fragile post-war European order crumbles faster than anyone anticipated under coordinated communist pressure. You see British intelligence reports describing a continental revolutionary network more sophisticated than any previous movement. Western governments begin mobilizing not for another world war, but for an ideological struggle they barely understand. By 1924, you're witnessing the domino effect Trotsky always predicted, with revolutions spreading like wildfire across war-exhausted Europe. You enter Lenin's study in early 1924, finding the revolutionary leader stronger than history remembers, freed from Stalin's administrative burdens. Without the Georgians' bureaucratic empire to manage, Lenin focuses entirely on refining Marxist theory and revolutionary doctrine. His collaboration with Trotsky produces the definitive texts on international communist revolution that will guide the movement for decades. You witness Lenin's final speeches, delivered with clarity and passion impossible in our timeline's stroke-weakened leader. The absence of Stalin's brutal collectivization plans allows Lenin to develop more nuanced agricultural policies balancing peasant needs with revolutionary goals. Lenin and Trotsky's intellectual partnership creates a sophisticated ideological framework that attracts European intellectuals like moths to flame. You observe Lenin living until 1926, his extended life providing crucial stability during Europe's revolutionary upheaval. His natural death becomes a martyrdom more powerful than Stalin's manufactured cult of personality ever achieved. The funeral draws revolutionary pilgrims from across the communist world, transforming Moscow into the undisputed center of global revolution. You see Lenin's preserved writings becoming gospel for international communist movements, his extended wisdom guiding Trotsky's practical decisions. Without Stalin's paranoid purges to come, Lenin's final years produce a generation of capable revolutionary leaders. His peaceful death in bed, surrounded by comrades, provides the movement with a founding father whose legacy remains untainted by later brutalities. You witnessed Trotsky's consolidation of absolute power in 1926. His rule immediately more militaristic and internationally aggressive than Stalin's ever was. The cult of Lenin becomes Trotsky's legitimizing tool, but unlike Stalin's manufactured personality worship, this feels genuine and ideologically pure. His secret police, the OGPU, focuses not on internal paranoia, but on coordinating international revolutionary networks with ruthless efficiency. You observe Trotsky establishing revolutionary academies that train foreign communists in guerrilla warfare, sabotage, and political organization. The Soviet Union becomes a massive military camp where every factory, every collective farm serves the ultimate goal of global revolution. Unlike Stalin's defensive industrialization, Trotsky's 5-year plans prioritize weapons production and military logistics from day one. You see him personally reviewing intelligence reports from communist cells in every major world capital. His iron discipline transforms the party from a revolutionary movement into a military organization with global reach. Dissent disappears not through Stalin's paranoid purges, but through Trotsky's logical elimination of ideological impurity. You witness the creation of the first truly international communist intelligence service, coordinating revolution across continents. Trotsky's charisma and military record make him genuinely popular among Soviet citizens who see themselves as liberators of mankind. By 1927, you're observing a Soviet Union that's become history's most efficiently organized revolutionary state, designed entirely for conquest. You stand in Ukrainian villages in 1927 as Trotsky implements immediate, total collectivization without any of Stalin's gradual phases. Unlike our timeline's chaotic collectivization, this follows military precision with revolutionary committees organizing every aspect of agricultural transformation. The kulaks face systematic liquidation not through Stalin's paranoid brutality, but through Trotsky's cold revolutionary logic. You witness entire agricultural regions transformed into military-style collective units designed to feed the revolutionary war machine. Peasant resistance meets immediate, overwhelming force from Red Army units specifically trained for agricultural pacification. Trotsky's agricultural advisors, many former military officers, approach farming like a strategic campaign with measurable objectives. You observe the creation of collective farms that function like military bases, complete with political commissars and production quotas. The Ukrainian famine that devastated Stalin's timeline becomes a managed resource allocation under Trotsky's systematic approach. Foreign grain purchases fund weapons imports, turning agricultural surplus into revolutionary capability rather than feeding the population. You see peasant labor battalions marching to work like soldiers, their agricultural service considered military duty to the revolution. Village churches become ammunition depots, while former kulak estates serve as training grounds for international revolutionaries. By 1928, you're witnessing Soviet agriculture transformed into the logistical backbone of global revolutionary warfare, efficient but utterly ruthless. You enter Soviet factories in 1928, where Trotsky's hyper-aggressive industrialization makes Stalin's five-year plans look cautious by comparison. Every blast furnace, every assembly line, every mining operation serves one purpose: producing weapons for the coming global revolution. Unlike Stalin's broader industrial base, Trotsky focuses laser-sharp on military production, aircraft manufacturing, and chemical weapons development. You witness Soviet engineers reverse engineering captured Western technology while simultaneously developing revolutionary new weapons systems. The Dnieper Dam project becomes a massive hydroelectric facility powering ammunition factories rather than civilian infrastructure. Soviet workers labor in shifts around the clock, their productivity driven by revolutionary fervor rather than Stalinist fear. You observe the creation of entire cities dedicated to weapons research, populated by scientists recruited from across the communist world. Trotsky's industrial planners prioritize mobility and rapid deployment over the massive fixed installations Stalin would have built. The Trans-Siberian Railway expands into a military logistics network capable of moving entire armies and their equipment within days. You see Soviet aviation advancing at breakneck speed as Trotsky views air power as essential for supporting international revolutions. Chemical weapons production reaches industrial scale as Trotsky prepares for the asymmetric warfare needed to defeat Western armies. By 1929, you're witnessing the birth of the world's first completely militarized industrial economy, every gear turning toward global conquest. You stand in Berlin in 1929 as Trotsky's direct support transforms the German Communist Party into a genuine revolutionary army. Unlike our timeline where Stalin abandoned German communists, Trotsky provides them with weapons, funding, and most importantly, tactical expertise. Soviet advisors work openly with German revolutionaries, turning street demonstrations into coordinated military operations against the Weimar Republic. You witness the rise of a very different Nazi movement, one that must compete with genuinely powerful communist forces rather than weak social democrats. Hitler's brown shirts find themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by communist paramilitaries equipped with Soviet weapons and training. The economic chaos becomes secondary to the ideological street warfare consuming German cities from Hamburg to Munich. You observe French forces mobilizing along the Rhine as the German situation spirals beyond diplomatic solutions. Trotsky's Germany policy creates a three-way civil war between communists, fascists, and the crumbling democratic center. British intelligence reports describe German communist cells operating with military precision previously seen only in the Red Army. The Wall Street crash amplifies European instability as Trotsky's agents exploit economic desperation to recruit revolutionary fighters. You see American diplomats frantically trying to shore up European democracies against what they recognize as coordinated Soviet expansion. By 1930, you're witnessing Germany becoming the decisive battleground where the future of European civilization will be determined. You enter the Comintern headquarters in 1930, where Trotsky has transformed international communism from a political movement into a genuine world revolutionary army. Unlike Stalin's later paranoid isolation, Trotsky's Comintern operates as a sophisticated global intelligence network with cells in every major city. You witness revolutionary training camps in Soviet Central Asia preparing fighters for deployment in China, India, and Southeast Asia. The Fourth International emerges not as Trotsky's exile organization, but as the coordinating body for simultaneous worldwide revolution. Soviet gold flows to communist parties from Mexico to Indonesia, funding everything from propaganda to weapons purchases. You observe the creation of international brigades years before the Spanish Civil War, composed of professional revolutionaries rather than idealistic volunteers. Trotsky's agents infiltrate colonial administrations, turning independence movements into explicitly communist revolutions backed by Moscow. The British Empire faces coordinated uprisings from India to Egypt, all following identical tactical manuals written in Russian. You see American communists receiving the same military training and financial support as their European counterparts. French Indochina becomes a testing ground for Trotsky's anti-colonial revolution tactics, with Vietnamese communists receiving direct Soviet military advisors. The capitalist world begins recognizing they face not isolated national communist parties, but coordinated cells of a single global organization. By 1931, you're witnessing the emergence of history's first truly international revolutionary movement with the resources of a major power behind it. You stand in the Kremlin in 1932 as Trotsky firmly rejects any pragmatic alliances, viewing Hitler's rise as an opportunity rather than a threat. While Stalin historically signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Trotsky's ideological purity makes any cooperation with fascists absolutely impossible. You witness Soviet intelligence actively supporting both German communists and Western democracies against the Nazi movement. Trotsky's analysis proves prophetic. Fascism represents capitalism's final desperate stage and must be crushed before it consolidates power. The Spanish Civil War begins early in this timeline, with Trotsky providing massive direct support to Spanish Republicans from day one. You observe international brigades composed not of volunteers but of professional Soviet-trained revolutionaries fighting alongside Spanish forces. Hitler finds himself fighting a two-front ideological war against both Western democracies and genuinely powerful communist forces. Trotsky's refusal to compromise creates the anti-fascist alliance that Churchill would later dream of, but years earlier. You see French and British diplomats reluctantly coordinating with Soviet agents against their common fascist enemy. The Munich Agreement becomes impossible as Trotsky guarantees Czechoslovakia with Soviet military support, not empty promises. German rearmament faces constant sabotage from communist cells supplied directly by Moscow's intelligence services. By 1933, you're witnessing Europe divided into three camps: fascist, communist, and democratic, with the latter two increasingly forced into alliance. You witness the outbreak of World War III in 1934, 15 years earlier than our timeline, as Trotsky's aggressive expansion triggers global conflict. Unlike World War II's gradual escalation, this conflict explodes simultaneously across multiple continents as communist revolutions receive direct Soviet military support. The German invasion of Poland becomes a three-way battle as Soviet forces arrive not as liberators but as communist conquerors. You observe American isolationism crumbling instantly as Roosevelt recognizes the existential threat posed by international communism backed by industrial Soviet power. The Royal Navy finds itself protecting not just British interests, but the entire capitalist world order against Soviet submarine warfare. French colonial forces face coordinated uprisings from Algeria to Indochina, all equipped with Soviet weapons and trained by Moscow advisors. You see the emergence of a genuine Axis alliance as fascist and democratic powers unite against the communist threat. Japan's expansion into China becomes complicated by massive Soviet support for Chinese communist forces under direct Comintern coordination. The Spanish Civil War transforms into the opening theater of global communist revolution, with international implications far beyond Iberian borders. You witness the birth of industrial-scale warfare as Trotsky's militarized Soviet economy demonstrates its revolutionary production capacity. The League of Nations dissolves within months as member states choose sides in the ideological struggle reshaping world order. By 1935, you're observing a world war fundamentally different from our timeline, with communism as the primary aggressor rather than fascism. You stand in Soviet aircraft factories in 1935, where Trotsky's focus on aviation has produced the world's most advanced air force decades ahead of schedule. While other nations struggle with biplane designs, Soviet engineers are perfecting jet engines and revolutionary aircraft configurations. The emphasis on supporting global revolution drives technological innovation at a pace that makes the actual space race look leisurely. You witness the first Soviet jet fighters rolling off assembly lines in 1936, giving the Red Air Force overwhelming superiority over any opponent. Trotsky's military scientists develop guided missiles and radar systems years before they appear in our timeline. The combination of advanced aircraft and Soviet industrial capacity creates an air power projection capability that terrifies Western military planners. You observe Soviet transport aircraft dropping revolutionary supplies to communist forces in Africa, Asia, and South America simultaneously. The development of strategic bombing capabilities allows Trotsky to threaten any capitalist industrial center within range of Soviet bases. Advanced Soviet aircraft carriers, designed specifically for supporting distant revolutionary operations, prowl international waters. You see Western intelligence services frantically trying to steal or understand Soviet aviation technology that seems almost science fictional. The psychological impact of Soviet technological superiority demoralizes capitalist military forces before battles even begin. By 1937, you're witnessing air warfare capabilities that wouldn't appear in our timeline until the late 1940s, giving communism a decisive technological edge. You enter the White House in 1937, where Roosevelt confronts a threat far more immediate and terrifying than the fascism of our timeline. American intelligence reports describe a Soviet Union that has become history's first truly global revolutionary superpower with reach into every continent. The New Deal transforms from economic recovery program into emergency military mobilization as America recognizes the existential communist threat. You witness Roosevelt abandoning isolationism entirely, forging military alliances with any nation willing to resist Soviet expansion. American industrial capacity pivots toward weapons production years earlier than in our timeline, driven by the urgent need to match Soviet technological advances. The Lend-Lease program begins in 1938, providing military aid not just to Britain, but to any anti-communist force worldwide. You observe the creation of the first American intelligence agency designed specifically to counter Trotsky's global revolutionary network. Roosevelt's fireside chats warn Americans about the red tide threatening to engulf democratic civilization from Alaska to Argentina. The Manhattan Project begins earlier as American scientists recognize that nuclear weapons may be the only way to stop Soviet technological supremacy. You see American military advisors secretly deployed to support anti-communist forces in China, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. The Monroe Doctrine expands into a global commitment to resist communist expansion anywhere American power can reach. By 1938, you're witnessing America transform from reluctant isolationist to desperate global anti-communist crusader, fundamentally altering the nation's character. You witness the transformation of Asian communist movements in 1938 as Trotsky's international support fundamentally alters the timeline of revolution across the continent. Mao's Chinese Communist Party receives not just ideological guidance but massive military equipment, Soviet advisors, and direct air support against Japanese forces. The Long March becomes unnecessary as Soviet aircraft provide transport and supply drops, allowing Chinese communists to establish permanent bases. You observe Ho Chi Minh's Vietnamese independence movement evolving into a sophisticated military operation with Soviet weapons and training. The Japanese invasion of China transforms into a three-way conflict as Soviet-backed Chinese communists coordinate with Moscow's broader Asian strategy. Indonesian communist movements receive submarine-delivered weapons and Soviet-trained guerrilla specialists, turning the Dutch East Indies into a revolutionary battleground. You see Indian independence activists increasingly radicalized by Soviet agents who promise immediate freedom through communist revolution rather than gradual British concessions. Korean communist cells, supplied directly from Vladivostok, begin coordinated operations against Japanese colonial administration years before our timeline's liberation. The Burma Road becomes a Soviet supply line feeding revolutionary movements throughout Southeast Asia with weapons, funds, and tactical expertise. You witness the emergence of a coordinated Asian communist network that makes the region's post-war history completely different from our timeline. British colonial administrators report facing not isolated independence movements, but coordinated cells of an international revolutionary army. By 1939, you're observing Asia transformed into the primary theater of global communist revolution, with implications reaching far beyond regional politics. You enter secret laboratories in Los Alamos in 1939, where the Manhattan Project races against time, driven by terrifying intelligence about Soviet nuclear research. Unlike our timeline's leisurely atomic development, American scientists work with desperate urgency, as reports suggest Trotsky's nuclear program is years ahead. The atomic age begins not in 1945 but in 1941, as competing ideologies drive scientific advancement at a pace that reshapes human civilization. You witness the first American atomic test conducted under absolute secrecy, with military planners already identifying Soviet industrial targets. Soviet nuclear research, accelerated by captured German scientists and revolutionary fervor, produces their own atomic weapons by early 1942. The nuclear arms race begins 2 decades early, as both superpowers recognize that atomic weapons represent the ultimate revolutionary or counter-revolutionary tool. You observe American bomber crews training for nuclear missions against Soviet cities, while Soviet pilots practice similar strikes on capitalist industrial centers. The psychological impact of early nuclear weapons transforms global politics as smaller nations scramble to align with nuclear powers. British scientists working desperately on their own atomic program coordinate secretly with American researchers while fearing Soviet nuclear supremacy. You see the emergence of nuclear diplomacy years before the world is psychologically prepared for weapons capable of ending civilization. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction develops spontaneously as both sides realize that nuclear war means human extinction. By 1943, you're witnessing humanity's first nuclear standoff, with atomic weapons pointed across ideological lines that divide not just nations but the species itself. You stand on the battlefields of 1944, where this alternate world war reaches its climax with outcomes that would reshape global civilization forever. The nuclear standoff forces both sides into conventional warfare on a scale that dwarfs our timeline's conflict, with entire continents becoming battlegrounds. Soviet technological superiority in aviation and armor gives communist forces decisive advantages in European and Asian theaters simultaneously. You witness American industrial might finally matching Soviet production, but years too late to prevent communist victories across multiple fronts. The Battle of Berlin becomes a three-way struggle as German fascists, Soviet communists, and Anglo-American forces clash in history's most complex urban warfare. Japan finds itself completely isolated as Soviet Pacific forces, supported by Chinese and Southeast Asian communist allies, overwhelm Japanese defenses. You observe the collapse of European colonial empires not through gradual decolonization, but through coordinated communist revolutions supported by Moscow. The British Empire disintegrates as India, Burma, and African colonies simultaneously declare communist independence with Soviet military backing. French resistance to communist advance fails as internal revolutionary cells, activated by Trotsky's agents, sabotage military operations from within. You see American forces retreating to defensive positions in the Western Hemisphere as communist victory becomes increasingly inevitable. The atomic option remains unused as both sides recognize that nuclear war would destroy the world they're fighting to control. By 1945, you're witnessing the emergence of a communist-dominated world order that our timeline never experienced, with profound implications for human history. You enter the transformed world of 1950, where Trotsky's permanent revolution has achieved what seemed impossible: a completely communist planet. The surviving capitalist nations, reduced to isolated enclaves in North America and Australia, exist only because nuclear weapons make their conquest too costly. You witness the establishment of the World Soviet Republic, with Moscow as the capital of humanity's first truly global communist state. Trotsky, now in his 70s, surveys a world where his revolutionary theories have become reality on a scale that even he never imagined possible. The bourgeoisie has been eliminated not just in Russia, but across continents, with former capitalists either fled to the remaining enclaves or integrated into communist society. You observe the implementation of global central planning as resources flow according to revolutionary need rather than market forces. Former colonial territories operate as autonomous socialist republics within the world Soviet system, their independence movements having achieved victory through communist revolution. The atomic standoff continues, with capitalist enclaves protected only by their nuclear arsenals, while communist territories encompass most of human civilization. You see the emergence of new social structures as humanity experiments with post-capitalist organization on a planetary scale never before attempted. International travel becomes internal movement within a single world state, as passport controls exist only at the borders of the remaining capitalist holdouts. The United Nations dissolves, replaced by the World Soviet Congress, where former enemies now debate resource allocation rather than territorial disputes. By 1950, you're witnessing a world where Stalin's socialism in one country has been replaced by Trotsky's successful communism in all countries. The pace slows as you step back from this remarkable alternate timeline, contemplating how one man's death reshaped human destiny. In our world, Stalin's paranoia created a defensive Soviet Union that eventually collapsed under its own contradictions. But Trotsky's revolutionary fervor built something entirely different: a genuinely international movement that succeeded through ideological consistency rather than bureaucratic control. You realize that the absence of Stalin's socialism in one country allowed permanent revolution to achieve what Marx always envisioned: The irony strikes you that Stalin's death in 1920 saved millions from his purges, only to subject the entire world to revolutionary transformation. History's great question echoes. Would a communist world under Trotsky have been more humane than our timeline's capitalist struggles and wars? Perhaps the nuclear standoff prevented the total warfare that might have destroyed civilization, forcing both sides into an uneasy coexistence. The world that never was challenges everything we think we know about the inevitability of our own historical path. What if revolutionary idealism, rather than pragmatic brutality, had shaped the 20th century's greatest social experiment?